Hello, I'm Connor. I'm one of the product managers here at Moorr, and today I'm going to be talking you through a new feature that we've just released, the negative gearing analysis tool. This video is for educational purposes and not financial advice. So to give a bit of a background at how this came about is, we were around the office the day after the budget announcement, of course, debating the impacts of the negative gearing changes. And we really created this as just an internal tool just to help us understand the differences in the sort of scenarios we're playing out in our advisory business. And, of course, we have a personal interest and we just love property and investing. So of course, we're going to be discussing these things as well. So I had the idea of essentially bringing this to more users as fellow investors. It's quite interesting to have a look at and sort of see the different comparisons as well. So I'm going to talk you through the feature now and some of the features we have here, and then how you might use this tool as well, and some of the key takeaways that I personally took out of it as well. So here you can see under the My Property menu option here, we have the gearing analysis, and this is where we can click in and view this feature. On the first page here, we have Overview. So this is a really good place to start. Have a look at the assumptions that we can play around with on the left. Like I said, this doesn't pull through any data that you've entered in Moorr or anything like that. It's just a sandbox to play and interact with. So we can see things here like your income. You can add a second person if you want to add income for a partner, for example. And you can use different income rates, use the slide here, or just manually enter the value, like so, for example. Of course, you can also just return to the defaults. And we can sort of start to see how these interact with each other. We can again choose the different ownership percentages. Let's just leave it 50-50 for now. And then here we can start to play with the actual property information itself. So we have a purchase price, we have a growth rate, a loan to value ratio, and an interest rate. We do assume, just for this sort of comparison tool and this feature, that it is just an interest only rate. So we would assume that for the duration of your property here, it is interest only in this scenario. And another thing to note is there's no considerations for things like offsets or anything like that. It really is just a property in isolation, having a look at the differences between no negative gearing and negative gearing. We have here the rental yield, which is essentially just the income proportion of that, and the rental growth rate as well. So typically, some people would say that it grows in line with the value of the property. So for example, we might have a growth rate here of 6% and then use a growth rate to the rent of a 6% as well. But you can change that as your heart desires to maybe inflation or whatever you see fit there. The holding costs here, this is things like your rates, maintenance, property management, everything like that. So it's simply a percentage of the asset value. So for here, just for argument's sake, we have 1%. Again, we have the inflation rate that is applied to those holding costs. So let's have a look at the chart itself. Now at the bottom here, we do have these 30-year projection table. So for the real data nerds that want to go through, have a look at the different information line by line, go for it. That's where I like to hang out as well. But we won't go through that in fine detail. Let's just stick to the chart here for now. Essentially what we see here is early on as you've just purchased a property, then this is where the property is typically negatively geared, and you can see there is actually a negative cash flow during this time. So again, this would depend if we change the loan to value ratio, if we change the capital growth and rental assumptions, or just the purchase price as well. But we can see here the difference between the negative gearing, which is in this dark color here, the dark purple, or the no negative gearing, which is in this light purple. One thing early on to highlight is, yes, there is a difference in this sort of shorter time frame, but as we own the property for longer and longer periods, we do start to level out as the property starts to become positive cash flow, as we can see here. We are then using essentially those sort of carry forward losses until the property is eventually actually between the two different scenarios of no negative gearing and negative gearing. Really, the benefit of either scenario really becomes quite parallel, and you really can't tell much of a difference between the two situations here. If you were to change these scenarios, so let's go, right now we have quite a balanced asset, but if we were to change maybe to a more high growth property at 7% and a slightly lower yield, then we would see the chart update and reflect that change. Again, it would push back when this property becomes positive cash flow, and when that the change between negative gearing and no negative gearing would update there as well. We also have the growth versus cash flow chart here. So what I noticed about this chart, I think the very first thing for me was how much of weight actually comes from the growth of the property, which is what you can see in this light blue chart here. So I think it's really good to take a moment and just consider that really that's where the wealth accumulation occurs, through that growth. And all the discussions around negative gearing, no negative gearing, yes, it does help hold the property, of course, but really the big impact is around the growth story that we can see here as well. So again, this will change if you do want to play around with different scenarios. This will update as well here. We can see again the no negative gearing and the negative gearing down in the bottom. Now let's have a look here at this comparison page. Now this is where you might look at two different properties. So here you can directly compare a no negative gearing versus a negative gearing property. You could look at a high growth, lower rent versus a higher rent, lower growth, for example. Or you could compare, say, a new property that has the negative gearing benefits versus an old established one that won't. So let's have a look here. Again, you can change the sort of shared assumptions around the income and the ownership and interest rates as well. But let's have a look at the property information assumptions here. So let's say we're choosing a higher growth property here. Really, I'm just sort of playing around with some rough examples, but let's have a look at what you can do. So here we might go slightly lower growth for argument's sake, slightly higher yield. Again, this will, depending on how you see rental growth rates changing, holding costs, everything like that, it will change the scenario. But this really is the power of the feature, I guess. You can choose whatever your heart desires and how you sort of see things playing out. This is where you can compare those two properties. So here we have the negative gearing of both, the no negative gearing of the first property here, the higher price point, higher growth, versus the no negative gearing of that higher rental yield. But what we can do as well is actually compare the negative gearing versus no negative gearing on both of these properties. So let's say both of them have negative gearing. We can compare those two properties, but if we are saying, for argument's sake, that this is a new property, with negative gearing and the established doesn't, then we can see how that plays out. And we have the same two charts that we saw on that previous page, the cash flow chart, as well as that difference between the growth and the rental yield as well. You can also just imagine that they're the exact same properties, but with no negative gearing and negative gearing, and see a side-by-side comparison of those two as well. So yeah, feel free to play around. If there's any feedback or anything you want to see added, any questions you have, or you just want a bit more information on how this all works, then feel free to reach out to us through the help desk and submit a ticket, and we'll go through and action those as well for you. Thank you very much.